A gentle autumn breeze swept through the bustling streets of Boston as Dr. Marie Bennett emerged from Massachusetts General Hospital. The clock had just struck 7:30 p.m., and the accomplished neurosurgeon had every reason to feel proud. She had just completed one of the most challenging surgeries of her career, a complex 12-hour procedure that saved a young father's life. At 42, Dr. Bennett had already earned a reputation as one of the finest neurosurgeons on the East Coast. Her steady hands and innovative techniques had saved countless lives, though few would recognize her outside the hospital walls. Today had been particularly demanding. The surgery, which began at dawn, required intense concentration and precision. Marie had stayed completely focused, taking only one brief break during the entire procedure. Now, as she walked to her car, her surgical cap still tucked in her pocket, she wore a simple pair of faded jeans, comfortable sneakers, and her favorite old Harvard Medical School sweatshirt. As she drove through the city streets, her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything substantial since the previous night. Usually, Marie would head straight home after such a long day, maybe order takeout, but tonight felt different. The success of the surgery had put her in a celebratory mood. Le Blanc, she said to herself, thinking of the upscale French restaurant she'd been meaning to try. The prestigious establishment had opened 6 months ago and had quickly become the talk of Boston's elite dining scene. She'd heard colleagues raving about their exceptional cuisine and elegant atmosphere. Marie glanced at her casual attire in the rearview mirror and momentarily considered driving home to change. No, she decided. I'm too hungry, and they can't possibly be fully booked on a Wednesday evening. Besides, she had learned long ago not to judge people by their appearance, and she expected the same courtesy from others. Pulling into the restaurant's parking lot, Marie noticed several expensive cars: Mercedes, BMWs, and even a Bentley. The restaurant's exterior was impressive, with its classic architecture and warm, inviting lights glowing through large windows. A smartly dressed couple emerged from their car, the woman wearing what appeared to be designer clothing and sparkling jewelry. For a brief moment, Marie felt self-conscious about her casual appearance but quickly dismissed the feeling. She had just spent 12 hours saving a life. If anyone had earned the right to enjoy a good meal in comfortable clothes, it was her. The valet parking attendant approached her modest Toyota Camry with the same professional courtesy he had shown to the luxury vehicles, which made Marie smile. She handed him her keys and received the claimed ticket, tucking it into her wallet. As she approached the entrance, Marie could smell the delicious aromas wafting from the kitchen. Fresh baked bread, aromatic herbs, and something wonderfully savory she couldn't quite identify. Her stomach growled again, more insistently this time. The restaurant's interior was even more spectacular than she had imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the dining room, and elegant artwork adorned the walls. The soft sounds of classical music played in the background, and the gentle murmur of conversation created a sophisticated atmosphere. The hostess, a young woman named Sarah, greeted Marie with a genuine smile. "Good evening, welcome to Le Blanc," she said warmly, seemingly unfazed by Marie's casual attire. Sarah checked the reservation book, and Marie explained she didn't have one but hoped they could accommodate her. "Of course," Sarah replied, "we have several tables available. Please follow me." As they walked through the restaurant, Marie noticed the diverse mix of diners. Business people still in their suits, couples dressed for a night out, and even a family celebrating what appeared to be a graduation. What Marie didn't notice was the tall waiter watching her from across the room. James Carson had been working at Le Blanc since its opening, priding himself on what he called maintaining standards. His eyes narrowed as he saw Sarah leading Marie toward one of the prime tables, and his lips curled into a slight sneer. As Marie settled into her chair, she felt grateful for this moment of peace after such an intense day. She had no way of knowing that her quiet celebratory dinner was about to become something entirely different. An encounter that would not only challenge her evening, but would eventually lead to significant changes in Boston's restaurant industry. Sarah handed Marie a menu with a smile and informed her that her server would be with her shortly. As Marie opened the leather-bound menu, she was completely unaware that her waiter, James Carson, was already forming judgments that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could have anticipated. James Carson approached table 15 with deliberate slowness, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. In his 10 years of working at upscale restaurants, He had developed what he considered a sixth sense about diners. One look at Marie's casual sweatshirt made him curl his lip in disdain. "Good evening," he said, his tone notably cooler than the one he used with other guests. "I'm James, and I'll be your server tonight." He didn't ar. Marie noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately. The warmth she had felt from Sarah, the hostess, evaporated in the face of James's frosty demeanor. Still, she smiled politely, too used to breaking down prejudices to let it bother her. "Would Madame prefer to see our wine list?" James asked, emphasizing Madame in a way that made it sound like an insult. Before Marie could respond, he added, "Our prices start at $90 per bottle." His tone suggested he doubted she could afford even that. "Just water for now, thank you," Marie replied calmly, though she had initially planned to celebrate with champagne. She watched as James's face registered what he assumed was confirmation of his prejudice. Minutes later, he returned with her water, not in the elegant crystal glasses that adorned other tables, but in a plain plastic cup typically reserved for kitchen staff. He placed it on the table without a coaster, allowing water to pool on the expensive wooden surface. From her seat, Marie could observe James's interactions with other diners. At a nearby table, he was charm personified, suggesting wine pairings and describing the chef's specials with flourishing hand gestures. The contrast was stark and deliberate. The restaurant had filled up considerably since Marie's arrival, yet several prime tables remained empty. She noticed her position, tucked away in a darker corner near the kitchen doors, where the constant swinging movement of servers disrupted any chance of a peaceful dining experience. A young couple who had arrived after her was seated at a beautiful window table, despite having no reservation. They wore designer clothes and expensive watches, and James immediately brought them champagne flutes filled with sparkling water, along with an amuse-bouche she hadn't been offered. The kitchen door swung open again, and Marie caught fragments of conversation. "Can you believe they let her sit here?" James's voice carried clearly. "This isn't some downtown diner." Laughter followed, though Marie noticed one of the younger servers looking uncomfortable. At the next table, an elderly couple glanced her way with sympathy. The woman whispered something to her husband, who frowned and shook his head disapprovingly, not at Marie, but at the treatment she was receiving. A group of businessmen at another table had also noticed. One of them, an African-American executive in a tailored suit, had been watching the situation unfold with growing anger. He discreetly took out his phone and began recording James's behavior. When James finally returned to take her order, he didn't bother with his usual recitation of specials. "Have you had enough time with the menu?" he asked, his pen hovering impatiently over his notepad. "The burger might be more suitable for your tastes." The implication was clear. He assumed she would order the cheapest item on the menu. Marie glanced at the menu again, her medical training allowing her to remain calm in stressful situations kicking in. "I'll have the beef tenderloin, medium rare," she said clearly, with the truffle risotto and the seasonal vegetables. It was one of the most expensive items on the menu. James's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's $120, he stated flatly, as if expecting her to change her mind. When Marie simply nodded, his face tightened. "And how will you be paying this evening?" "My credit card," Marie replied, maintaining her composure even as other diners around her began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, aware of the inappropriate questioning. Behind her, the kitchen doors swung open again. This time, she heard a different voice, younger, female, saying, "James, you can't keep doing this. Remember what happened at your last job." But James wasn't listening. He was too busy making a show of scrutinizing Marie's table setting, removing her bread plate with the excuse that she probably wouldn't need it, and deliberately avoiding filling her water cup despite attending promptly to every other table in his section. What James didn't realize was that with every slight, with every discriminatory action, he was digging himself deeper into a situation that would soon explode in his face. And Marie, drawing on years of dealing with prejudice in the medical field, was documenting every single interaction, building a case that would soon change not just James's evening, but his entire perspective on life. The tenderloin arrived at Marie's table looking nothing like the perfectly plated dishes she'd seen delivered to other diners. The meat was carelessly placed on the plate, the risotto was clumped together, and the vegetables appeared to have been hastily thrown on as an afterthought. When she cut into the steak, she found it well done instead of medium rare as she had ordered. James hovered nearby, watching with barely concealed satisfaction as Marie discovered the overcooked meat. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Perhaps this type of cuisine isn't what you're used to." Marie placed her fork down gently. "Actually, the steak is well done, not medium rare as ordered." Her voice remained steady and professional, the same tone she used when instructing medical residents. "Oh," James picked up the plate with exaggerated care. "We'll have to remake it. It might take a while. Our chef is very particular about certain customers." He emphasized the last words, making his meaning clear to everyone within earshot. At the next table, a couple had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. The woman was recording everything on her phone, while her husband typed furiously on his. Other diners were also paying attention now, their own meals forgotten as they witnessed James's increasingly obvious discrimination. When the second steak arrived 30 minutes later, it was practically raw. James placed it before Marie with a smirk. "Perhaps this is more to your liking," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Though I must say, this cut of meat is usually appreciated by our more sophisticated clientele." The African-American executive who had been recording earlier stood up from his table, but his wife gently pulled him back down, whispering something in his ear. He sat, but his eyes never left Marie's table, his phone still recording. Marie cut into the nearly raw meat, red juices pooling on the white plate. She looked up at James, who was still hovering expectantly. "I'll need this cooked to medium rare, as originally ordered," she said calmly. Several diners nodded in approval at her composure. James snatched the plate away. "Of course," he sneered. "The kitchen will be thrilled to cook your steak a third time, though perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the diner down the street." As he walked away, Marie could hear him complaining loudly in the server station. "These people never know what they want. Coming in here, dressed like that, making demands." His voice carried clearly across the restaurant, causing several patrons to gasp at his audacity. The elderly couple who had noticed earlier called over another server, speaking to her in hushed but urgent tones. The young server's face reddened as she listened, and she quickly disappeared into the kitchen. While waiting for her third steak, Marie noticed something interesting. Other staff members were clearly uncomfortable with James's behavior. The bartender shook his head disapprovingly when James made another racist comment at the service station. The food runners and other servers were giving him a wide berth, and the hostess, Sarah, was speaking quietly with what appeared to be a supervisor. When the third steak finally arrived, it was delivered by a different server, a young woman who smiled apologetically at Marie. "I'm so sorry about the wait," she said sincerely. "Can I get you anything else?" Before Marie could respond, James materialized beside the table. "I'll handle this," he snapped at the other server. Turning to Marie, he said, "I hope this meets your standards. Though I must say, most of our regular customers don't require 3 attempts to get their order right." Marie took a bite of the perfectly cooked steak, maintaining eye contact with James as she did so. "The steak is excellent," she said. "I'd like to speak with your manager." James's smile widened, becoming almost predatory. "Of course," he said, clearly assuming Marie would be complaining about the price or trying to get a free meal. "I'll fetch Mr. Thompson right away. Though I should warn you, we take our reputation very seriously here." As James walked away, Marie could hear him muttering under his breath about these people always trying to get something for free. What he didn't notice was that nearly half the restaurant was now documenting his behavior, phones discreetly recording his every move and comment. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the atmosphere of LeBlanc forever. As Mr. Thompson made his way across the restaurant floor, neither he nor James had any idea that they were about to learn a powerful lesson about prejudice, privilege, and the danger of making assumptions. As Mr. Thompson approached Marie's table, James trailed behind him with a smug expression. The restaurant manager was a well-dressed man in his 50s, his silver hair perfectly styled and his suit immaculate. He walked with the confidence of someone used to handling difficult situations. "I understand there's been some concern about your meal," Mr. Thompson began professionally, but as he turned to face Marie, his expression changed dramatically. The color drained from his face as recognition dawned in his eyes. "Dr. Bennett?" he gasped, his voice carrying across the now quiet section of the restaurant. Behind him, James' triumphant smile froze. "Dr. Marie Bennett from Mass General." James's face twitched as he watched his manager's reaction. The other diners, who had been discreetly recording the previous interactions, now held their phones up more openly, capturing this unexpected turn of events. "Yes, Mr. Thompson," Marie replied calmly. "It's good to see you. How is your father recovering from his surgery last month?" The manager's eyes welled up with emotion. "Thanks to you, he's doing wonderfully. He's even starting to walk again." He turned to face James, whose expression had transformed from smug superiority to growing horror. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Before James could respond, a voice called out from across the restaurant. "I too." It was the African-American executive who had been recording earlier. "That's Dr. Bennett. She performed emergency surgery on my daughter last year. She's one of the top neurosurgeons in the country." Another diner stood up. "She saved my wife's life 2 years ago. Most surgeons had given up hope. Dr. Bennett found a way." James began to fidget with his bow tie, his earlier confidence evaporating. The young server who had tried to warn him earlier whispered something in his ear, causing his face to pale even further. "Mr. Thompson," Mary said, her voice clear and steady, "I'd like to share something with you." She gestured to her phone, where she had been documenting every interaction. The surrounding diners, one by one, began to approach the table, offering their own recordings. The evidence was damning. Video after video showed James's discriminatory behavior: the plastic cup, the deliberate poor service, the racist comments at the server station, the sabotaged food orders. Each clip painted a clearer picture of systematic discrimination. "I had no idea," Mr. Thompson said, his voice shaking with anger and embarrassment. "Dr. Bennett, I cannot apologize enough. This is absolutely unacceptable." James, now sweating visibly, attempted to defend himself. "Sir, I didn't know who she was. If I had known." "That's exactly the problem," Marie interrupted, her voice firm but calm. "You shouldn't treat anyone this way, regardless of who they are or what they do for a living." The elderly couple who had been watching all evening approached the table. The woman spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "We've been coming here for years, but we've never seen such disgusting behavior. We watched this young man treat other diners like royalty while deliberately humiliating Dr. Bennett." The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to watch the scene unfold. The hostess, Sarah, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "I have to speak up," she said. "This isn't the first time. James has done this to other guests too, but most of them just leave without saying anything. Some of us have tried to report it, but—" Mr. Thompson raised his hand to stop her. "No more. This ends tonight." He turned to James, who was now visibly shaking. "You're suspended effective immediately. We'll discuss your termination paperwork tomorrow." But Marie raised her hand. "If I may suggest an alternative." All eyes turned to her. "Firing him might feel satisfying, but it won't solve the larger problem. Instead, I propose something more constructive." The room hung on her every word as she continued. "I serve on several diversity and inclusion boards. Perhaps this could be an opportunity for real change, not just for James, but for the entire restaurant industry in Boston." As she spoke, phones continued recording, capturing a moment that would soon go viral and spark a citywide conversation about discrimination in high-end establishments. James stood frozen, realizing that his actions would have consequences far beyond this one evening, and that his intended victim was now becoming his unexpected savior, though the lesson he was about to learn would be neither quick nor easy. The tension in Leblanc's dining room could be cut with a knife as Mr. Thompson pulled up a chair at Marie's table. James remained standing, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible anxiety. The other diners watched intently as the scene continued to unfold. "Dr. Bennett," Mr. Thompson began, his voice thick with emotion, "just 3 weeks ago, you spent 11 hours operating on my father when other doctors said his tumor was inoperable. You gave him his life back, and tonight, my staff treated you like—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Marie leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "Mr. Thompson, what happened tonight isn't just about me. From what your hostess Sarah said, this is a pattern." She gestured to the young server who had tried to warn James earlier. "Your staff has noticed it, your customers have noticed it, but until tonight, no one felt empowered to address it directly." The African-American executive who had been recording approached the table, introducing himself as Michael Richardson, CEO of a major tech company. Dr. Bennett, if you'll allow me, I'd like to add something to this conversation. My company regularly books corporate events here. We spend thousands of dollars every month, yet I've noticed subtle differences in how some of my colleagues of color are treated. Other diners began sharing their observations. A Hispanic woman in a designer dress described being asked repeatedly about her ability to pay. An Asian couple recalled being seated by the kitchen despite having reservations for a premium table. James, still standing nearby, had begun to tremble slightly. The weight of his actions, now being laid bare by customer after customer, seemed to physically press down on his shoulders. The young server who had tried to warn him placed a hand on his arm, but he shrugged it off. I didn't mean. James started to speak, but Marie held up her hand. Yes, you did mean it, she said firmly but without malice. Every action was deliberate. Every comment was intentional. The question now is not what you meant to do, but what you're going to learn from this. Mr. Thompson pulled out his phone and began making notes. Dr. Bennett, you mentioned serving on diversity boards. Would you be willing to help us develop a comprehensive training program, not just for our staff here, but for all our restaurants? Before Marie could respond, the elderly woman who had been watching all evening spoke up again. I've been dining here since this restaurant opened, and I've seen similar incidents, but I'm ashamed to admit I never spoke up. Maybe we're all part of the problem when we stay silent. The restaurant's chef, who had emerged from the kitchen during the commotion, stepped forward. As head chef, I take responsibility too. We've heard comments, seen behaviors, but we didn't take strong enough action. This ends tonight. James finally found his voice. Dr. Bennett, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I don't deserve any kindness from you. I judged you the moment you walked in. I treated you horribly. His voice broke as tears began to roll down his cheeks. Marie stood up, her presence commanding the room despite her casual attire. This isn't about deserving kindness. It's about creating change. Real, lasting change. She turned to Mr. Thompson. I have a proposal. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as she continued. Instead of simply implementing sensitivity training, let's create a comprehensive program. One that includes regular feedback from customers, anonymous reporting systems for staff, and clear consequences for discriminatory behavior. Let's make Le Blanc a model for other restaurants to follow. Mr. Thompson nodded enthusiastically, still taking notes. Yes, absolutely. And James? He turned to his waiter, who looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You have a choice to make. You can be part of this change, learn from it, grow from it, or you can leave. But if you stay, you'll need to commit to the process completely. The videos from that evening were still being recorded, capturing every word. What had started as documentation of discrimination was transforming into something else. A moment of potential transformation, not just for one prejudiced waiter, but for an entire institution. As Marie outlined her initial thoughts for the program, no one in the restaurant could have predicted how this evening would reshape dining culture in Boston. The hashtag LeBlanc was already trending on social media, and in the coming days, the story would catch the attention of national news outlets. But for now, in this moment, the focus was on the remarkable woman in the Harvard sweatshirt, who had turned an evening of discrimination into an opportunity for change. The following day, Le Blanc was closed for an emergency staff meeting. Every employee, from the dishwashers to the executive chef, gathered in the main dining room. The tables had been pushed aside to make room for chairs arranged in a circle, a deliberate choice to eliminate hierarchy. Last night, Mr. Thompson began, his voice heavy. We failed. Not just as a restaurant, but as human beings. He gestured to various social media posts projected on a screen behind him. The videos from the previous evening had gone viral, with millions of views and thousands of comments. James sat in the circle, his usual confident posture replaced by a slumped defeat. Several coworkers had already shared stories of similar incidents they'd witnessed over the past months. Sarah, a hostess, had brought forward a notebook documenting every discriminatory incident she'd observed. Dr. Bennett has agreed to help us, Mr. Thompson continued, not because we deserve it, but because she believes in the possibility of change. He stepped aside, allowing Marie to take the floor. Marie moved to the center of the circle, carrying a stack of papers. What happened last night wasn't just about one incident or one person, she began. It's about a culture that allows discrimination to thrive through silence and acceptance. She started distributing the papers. They were real stories from people who had faced discrimination in restaurants, including some from LeBlanc's own customers who had come forward overnight. The staff began reading, and several gasped as they recognized incidents they had witnessed. These are mothers, fathers, doctors, lawyers, teachers, human beings who came here to enjoy a meal and left feeling humiliated, Marie explained. Some never returned. Others never told their stories. Until now. James raised his hand slowly, his voice trembling as he spoke. I want to read something, if that's okay. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I wrote this last night. It's every discriminatory action I can remember taking since I started working here. Every person I prejudged. Every cruel comment I made. The room fell silent as James read his list. With each confession, tears rolled down his face. Other staff members began to cry too, recognizing their own complicity in staying silent. Michael Richardson, the CEO from the previous night, had also joined the meeting. He shared his own experiences of discrimination in high-end establishments, despite his wealth and status. His stories resonated deeply with the staff, making them understand how their actions affected people regardless of their position in society. As the morning progressed, Marie outlined her plan. It wasn't just about sensitivity training, it was about fundamental change. She proposed monthly anonymous feedback sessions for staff to report concerns. A customer feedback system specifically focused on ensuring equal treatment. Regular community outreach programs to diverse neighborhoods. Partnerships with minority-owned businesses and suppliers. A mentorship program for aspiring restaurant workers from underrepresented communities. The staff began to engage, offering their own suggestions and insights. The kitchen staff spoke about discrimination they'd faced, the servers discussed uncomfortable situations they'd witnessed, and the management team acknowledged their failure to address these issues properly. James, who had remained quiet after sharing his list, finally spoke again. Dr. Bennett, I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you're willing to teach, I'm willing to learn, really learn. Marie approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Change begins with acknowledgement. You've taken that step. Now comes the harder part, doing the work to become better. Mr. Thompson then made an announcement that surprised everyone. We're going to document this entire process. Our journey from this low point to what we hope to become will be transparent. Other restaurants should learn from our mistakes and our path to change. As the meeting continued, local news crews gathered outside. The story had grown beyond one incident, becoming a catalyst for examining discrimination in the restaurant industry as a whole. Several other high-end restaurants in Boston had already reached out, asking to be part of the change. Marie looked around the room at the tearful, determined faces. She saw genuine remorse, but more importantly, she saw hope. The previous night's humiliation was transforming into something powerful, a movement for real change in an industry long plagued by discrimination. The staff meeting ended with a commitment from each person to be part of the solution. As they left, many hugged James, not excusing his actions but supporting his commitment to change. The real work was just beginning, and no one underestimated the challenge ahead. 1 month after the incident, LeBlanc had transformed into something quite different from its former self. The physical space remained elegant, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically. On this particular evening, the restaurant was hosting a special event that would mark a turning point in its journey. When I walked into this restaurant in my old Harvard sweatshirt, Marie began, I never expected to spark a movement. But sometimes, the most significant changes come from unexpected moments. She gestured to the diverse crowd filling every table. Tonight, we're not just launching a training program. We're starting a revolution in how the restaurant industry thinks about inclusion. The program they had developed over the past month was comprehensive. It went beyond typical diversity training to include practical changes in hiring practices, customer service protocols, and community engagement. Already, 20 other high-end restaurants in Boston had signed up to participate. James stood up next, his hands shaking slightly as he approached the podium. The room fell silent. Many present had seen the viral videos of his behavior that night. A month ago, I was the face of everything wrong in this industry, he began. Today, I'm standing here as proof that people can change, but only if they're willing to confront their own prejudices honestly. He shared how the past month had changed him. He had spent time working in community kitchens, listening to stories of discrimination, and learning from people he had once judged unfairly. His voice cracked as he described a particularly powerful moment when he served dinner to a homeless neurosurgeon who had lost everything due to a medical crisis. Mr. Thompson then presented the concrete changes LeBlanc had implemented. A new hiring policy ensuring diverse representation at all levels. Regular community dining events where people from all backgrounds were welcomed. A mentorship program for aspiring restaurant workers from underserved communities. A partnership with local civil rights organizations to provide ongoing guidance. A customer feedback system specifically designed to catch discriminatory behavior. The most powerful moment came when some of LeBlanc's regular customers, who had witnessed the original incident, shared their observations of the changes. The elderly couple who had watched everything unfold that night spoke about the visible transformation in both the staff and the atmosphere. Michael Richardson, the CEO who had recorded the original incident, announced that his company would be funding scholarships for minority students interested in the culinary arts and restaurant management. "What we witnessed here a month ago was terrible," he said, "but it has led to something extraordinary." The local news crews captured everything, but this time they were recording a story of redemption and change rather than discrimination and shame. Several national networks had picked up the story, and restaurants across the country were reaching out to learn more about the program. James had become an unexpected spokesperson for change. His honest acknowledgement of his past behavior and his visible transformation made him a powerful example of how confronting one's prejudices could lead to genuine growth. He now conducted workshops sharing his journey, helping other restaurant workers recognize and address their own biases. Dr. Bennett's approach had been key to the success. Rather than pursuing punishment, she had focused on education and transformation. Her medical background had taught her that healing was possible, even in the most difficult cases, if the right treatment was applied with patience and persistence. The evening concluded with a surprise announcement. LeBlanc would be starting a foundation, funded by a percentage of their profits, dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in the restaurant industry. The foundation would provide resources for other restaurants to implement similar programs and support individuals from marginalized communities pursuing careers in the culinary arts. As the event ended, James approached Dr. Bennett. The man who had once treated her with such disdain now looked at her with genuine respect and gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing the possibility of change when I couldn't see it myself." Marie smiled, remembering the night that had started it all. "Sometimes," she replied, "the most powerful lessons come from our most uncomfortable moments." The transformation of LeBlanc was becoming a model for restaurants nationwide. What had begun as a horrible example of discrimination had evolved into a beacon of hope and change. As the guests departed that evening, they carried with them not just the memory of an inspiring event, but a practical blueprint for creating real change in their own establishments. 1 year after the infamous incident at LeBlanc, the restaurant hosted a special anniversary celebration. The event wasn't just about marking time, it was about showcasing the remarkable transformation that had taken place in Boston's restaurant industry. Dr. Marie Bennett sat at the same table where she had experienced discrimination a year ago, but this time she was surrounded. James Carson, now the director of LeBlanc's Diversity and Inclusion Program, moved confidently through the restaurant, greeting guests with genuine warmth. He no longer wore the waiter's uniform but instead dressed in a well-fitted suit that reflected his new role. The transformation in his demeanor was striking. Gone was the arrogant server, replaced by a humble advocate for change. A year ago, James addressed the gathered crowd. "I stood in this very spot as a symbol of everything wrong with our industry. Today, I stand here as living proof that change is possible." His voice carried across the packed restaurant, where representatives from over 50 restaurants had gathered to celebrate their collective progress. The statistics spoke for themselves. Under the new initiative, over 200 restaurants across Boston had implemented the training program. Customer complaints about discrimination had dropped by 70%. Employee satisfaction rates had increased significantly. Diversity in restaurant staff, particularly in management positions, had doubled. Mr. Thompson shared how Leblanc's business had actually improved since implementing the changes. We worried about losing customers, he admitted. Instead, we gained a whole new clientele while keeping our loyal customers. It turns out that treating people with dignity is good for business. The foundation established by LeBlanc had already provided scholarships to 30 students from underrepresented communities, helping them pursue careers in culinary arts and restaurant management. Several of these students were present at the celebration, sharing their stories and dreams. Michael Richardson, whose recorded video had helped document the original incident, announced the expansion of his company's scholarship program. What started as a terrible night has sparked a revolution in how we think about dining and dignity, he said, raising his glass in Dr. Bennett's direction. The most touching moment came when a group of former customers who had experienced discrimination at various restaurants shared their stories of returning to those same establishments and finding them transformed. Their testimonials brought tears to many eyes in the room. Sarah, the hostess who had first greeted Dr. Bennett that fateful night, had been promoted to customer relations manager. She now conducted training sessions for other restaurants, teaching them how to create truly welcoming environments for all guests. The evening's highlight was the premiere of a documentary that had been filmed throughout the year, chronicling Leblanc's journey. It showed the painful beginnings, the challenging conversations, the moments of breakthrough, and the ultimate transformation. James's evolution from discriminatory waiter to champion of change was particularly powerful. Dr. Bennett, when called to speak, kept her remarks brief but meaningful. A year ago, I walked in here wearing a Harvard sweatshirt, just wanting a quiet dinner after surgery. Instead, I found a calling I never expected. Today, we're not just celebrating change in one restaurant, we're celebrating a movement that's transforming an entire industry. The evening concluded with an announcement that would ensure the movement's continuation. Leblanc's program was being adopted by restaurant associations in 5 other major cities. What had started as one woman's experience with discrimination had grown into a national initiative for change. James approached Dr. Bennett as the evening wound down. You know, he said, sitting down at her table, I think about that night every single day. How differently I see the world now. How differently I see people. Marie smiled. The best kind of change, she replied, is the kind that opens not just our minds but our hearts. As guests began to leave, many stopped to look at a new addition to Leblanc's entrance, a simple plaque that read, Welcome all, judge none. Everyone has a story. Below it hung a framed Harvard Medical School sweatshirt, donated by Dr. Bennett, serving as a permanent reminder of the night that changed everything. The story of Leblanc had become more than just a tale of discrimination and redemption. It had become a blueprint for how confronting uncomfortable truths with courage and compassion could lead to lasting change. As the lights dimmed on the anniversary celebration, it was clear that this was not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter in the ongoing journey toward true equality and respect in the restaurant industry and beyond.